Now, it's my turn. And I'm feeling very shy, like a little delicate flower. Everyone thinks I'm so brave. How many people here think I'm brave? I'm terrified all the fucking time. And let me just say, because I know there's some young ears out here, trigger warning, trigger warning. I'm not going to get graphic, but my story is not pleasant in parts. And I don't ever do this if you're one of my storytellers, but I have not prepared. I kept trying to work on it and trying to finish 6,000 things this week, because if it's not like a stress level 38, I'm really not interested in participating in it. And there's so much I want to say, and this day is so important. And I'm really going to try not to cry my way through this. When I was a little kid, my first love, my first passion was books. My mom read to me every single night. And by 4 years old, I knew how to read. And I would get lost in books, and they were magic. All of the books. My mom could not give me enough books. And to this day, I have books in every single room, every single floor of my house. I'm sort of swimming in them. But I adore them. And so I always would write poems, and I would write songs for my animals, which there were many. And I would write plays, and I would make people act out in them, whether they wanted to or not. And I would sing, and I would dance. And I just assumed that would be my life as I got older, that I would have 5 Oscars by the time I was 20. And be a Pulitzer Prize-winning novelist, and pretty much just be untouchable. And the reason this was so important was I was this really lonely little kid that didn't fit in, and I didn't have any friends, except for animals. Thank God for animals. But I was weird, and children sense uniqueness in other children, and they kind of latch onto it like pit bulls. And so there was just this, I was 6 years old and I went to first grade, and they would say, "Erika, who's your dad?" And I would say, "I don't know." And they would say, "Well, are your parents still married?" And I would say, "No, they never were married." And they would say, "Well, do you know his name?" And I realized that I was supposed to know something like that. And that was the first time I remember feeling shame. And that emptiness, that if my father will show up, then we'll be okay. My mom will be okay. She'll stop crying. She won't have to work. She'll be able to stay home and bake cookies, and we can get a puppy. Right? This was my dream. And so I would close my eyes and I would pray that God would bring my father, please, soon, so that we could be okay. And then I would go and I would look out the window and I would wait for him to show up. And he never came. So I also had some issues with the higher power at that point too, because clearly God was not listening to me. And being a kid without a dad meant that my mom worked, and she worked a lot, and she raised me completely on her own with no help from anyone. And she worked about 15 hours a day, many days. And I was vulnerable. And there are predators in this world, as you all know. I think this whole audience is filled with Me Toos. And so adult men did what they did with children with neon signs that say victim and broken. And so I was passed around from these different people, and every one of them took a different part of me. So by the time I was 15, 16 years old, I felt broken, hence the name of my book, Broken Bits and Glitter. I never felt whole, and as each year went by, I just acted out more and more in shame. So I would spend time, I realized that my father wasn't going to show up. So if a man wanted to spend time with me, why not? And I figured if I could just be good enough in bed, that maybe that 5 minutes later, that he would love me. So I got really good at blowjobs. And I got really good at becoming a fantasy, a blow-up doll for whatever men's needs were. And I thought that was what my value was as a young woman. And I also am an alcoholic and an addict. And so with drinking and low self-esteem and shame and abandonment issues, I was a walking disaster. And I got sober my senior year of high school. I just celebrated 30 years of sobriety. It's always my favorite thing. I didn't die, yay! And it had so little to do with me. I'm an Irish drunk. I mean, like I drank to breathe, you know, like that's the cells in my body want to be annihilated and to not feel. And it's like someone just turned the button all the way up to volume 500 and kind of broke off the knob, and everything is just a lot, especially these days. My God. So I got sober, and I thought that was going to fix it, and I thought that was going to fill me. And I kept acting out. So like I wasn't drinking, I wasn't using, but I was still just passing myself around at this point. And nobody was doing anything to me anymore. I was doing those things. I was making those choices. And I was trying to put on this smiling face. You know, Brianna, your story touched me so much, that illusion, right? That everything's just okay. And inside I was dying. And I ended up selling myself in sobriety. I ended up going out with really abusive men. And these were things that I thought would define me for the rest of my life. I thought that I was always going to be a whore. I thought that I was always going to be the broken bits of girl parts held together with glitter glue. That was how I defined myself. I started college, I gave up. I started again, I gave up. I started again, I gave up. I sabotaged every opportunity given to me because I knew that I didn't deserve it. And a nice boy would come along, and I would sleep with his brother or his best friend to make sure that he didn't come near me again, because I couldn't have that kind of vulnerability. But I stayed sober, and I did the work, and I went to therapy, and I wanted to give up every day. I wanted to die because I just was so filled with shame and regret. And I wore it like a cape. I mean, it was my identity for a long time. And when I was 24 years old, I finally met my father. And I've told that story already, so you guys know he was a fascist and a piece of work. So I got on this 15-hour train ride, and I carried all these little girl expectations to meet him, that I was going to meet this man, and he was going to put his arms around me, and he was going to tell me that he loved me, and he was going to make it all okay. He was going to hug those broken bits and seal them together. And I met him, and he was like, "You're weak, and you're pathetic, and you're nothing, and you're worthless." And so I went into a pretty deep funk after that, and I stayed sober. How I've stayed sober, I don't know, but I want to tell you that my life is a living testament to the fact that you do not have to give up. You absolutely can. You always have that choice. But I'm so grateful today that I am present long enough to have just kept going and to have skidded through my life broken with blood and teeth hanging out and just pick myself up. Because I think there are two choices. You can lay down and die, or you can get up and you keep going. But there is no middle ground. And so after a really deep depression, I looked in the mirror one day, and this is so cliche, but I looked in the mirror and I thought, who the fuck? What are you doing? You're going to let this man define you? You're going to let him take your whole future? And so I put myself together and I went back out into the world. I was 25 years old at this point. What I didn't realize that I did was that I stopped writing. And I became a detective. I became a PI, and I did like lots of surveillances, and I peed in bottles in the back of my car. And, and you know, I got to help people. I got to be of service, and that feels really good. And that's another thing that I learned from sobriety, was that I got to take all of these stories, right? These stories that we tell. This is the beauty of storytelling. We're not on our phones. We're not watching something. We're connecting as human beings. Whatever we are out there, whatever our problems are, whatever our stuff, in here, we're the same. In here, we get to share all of these secrets and this stuff, this shame, right? The stuff you're supposed to keep quiet about. And we get to stand up and we get to tell the truth. And maybe you get to stand up in your lives and tell the truth. And that's the whole point of doing Roar. So anyway, I became a detective, and it worked. I became an entrepreneur, and I started my company in my living room, and I had one phone line, and I would answer the phone in different accents, so it sounded like I had 10 people working for me. And I didn't have a hold button, so it was like this whole thing, right? Like, that's a whole other story. And I'm Irish, and I just didn't want to fetch one more fucking cup of coffee for somebody. And I didn't want anyone to make me feel small one more time. And I wanted to see, if all things were possible, what I could do other than all the things that I was doing. And, you know, I did a lot of like shit jobs, and God bless shit jobs. God knows they paid my bills for many years. But I had this person in my life, this best friend. He's called Matt in the book. That's not his real name. But he believed in me, and he challenged me, and he told me, he said, "What the fuck are you doing? Like, you can do anything. And he was the first person in my life to really tell me that. And I believed him. And so he went and married a nice virgin, a beautiful, sweet girl, because he wanted to have 2 children and he wanted to go do all those things. And I was going to build an empire. So I built this company and I started it from nothing. And within a couple years, I started to make a little bit of money. And, you know, I grew up pretty poor. And so there was like, if you're poor, you're good and you're noble and you're kind. And if you're rich, you're greedy and you're arrogant and you're unkind and cold, especially in LA with all, oh my God, if a Mercedes cuts you off, he's a dick. If it's a Yugo, it's like, oh, sweetie, it's okay. And so it became my mission to prove to Matt that I was worthy. So I built this company, and then he moved back out from Texas, and he lived with me. And we shared this little condo minimum together, and we ended up becoming lovers. But we were best friends, and it was complicated. And again, I had that thing, right, that someone like Matt could never love someone like me. I can never get through this story. So I made the decision that he couldn't love me, and I pushed him away. And I worked, and I worked, and I spent every moment that I had with him when I could have. He wanted to go skydiving, and he wanted to go on road trips, and he wanted to do all these things we used to do when we were younger. And I always said the same thing: I'm too busy. I'm very important. I've got lots of really important things to do. I've got people depending on me. I've got clients and vendors, and I have to work. I have to make money. And then he died. And it was the biggest regret of my life. And I thought one more time that this was it. I didn't ever plan on getting through this life without this human who brought so much dignity to my life. And he saw me in a way that I could have never seen myself. And I'd love to tell you that I have all this self-worth and I just know inherently that I'm just deserving, but I didn't see it until I saw it in his eyes. And when he died, I wanted to die. Every moment of every day, I wanted to give up. It hurt to breathe. It was so painful. And I would get through the day and I would fall asleep and he would come to me in my dreams and we would spend all this time together and I'd wake up and he would be dead. And I would lose him every day and I was just like, fuck, I can't go through this. And at the year mark, I wrote him a letter and I said, I'm going to love you for the rest of my life, but I have to let you go. And for some reason, I started to make a list, and I don't know why. I think he inspired me, but I made a list of things I had put off because of time, money, or fear. And I started doing one thing a month that challenged me. Things that I really wanted to do, and if I would get that knot in my stomach of like, oh no, you can't do that, I would do that thing. So I jumped out of an airplane 25 times. And I learned a couple languages, and I started traveling the world. I had never left the U.S., and I started traveling all around the world by myself. And he was that kind of person. Like, that's what he did. And so I sort of picked up the torch that he left behind. And so a lot of the things that I do today, I do because he no longer can. And I've had a lot of angels along the way, a lot of people who died in the 80s. This entire generation of incredible people that we had that just were gone too young. And so on that list was write a book. And I kept putting it. Now, mind you, he died in 2003. And I kept putting that on the next year's list and the next year's list. And I did a couple triathlons, and I quit smoking 4 packs a day. And I moved up here. I didn't know a single soul when I moved here. But I knew there was something I was supposed to do here. And I knew that the women here were incredible. And I was a 38-year-old woman in Los Angeles, and I didn't want to grow old there. And I didn't want to walk around like one of those people, right? That like maybe 20 or maybe 85 and you're just not sure which, right? Like I have these laugh lines here and I have this carbohydrate belly. This is book belly right here. This is like give birth to that book. Yeah. And yeah. And presidential election, survived the last year of this insanity. But this is my belly. And there's popcorn in it. Hold on. Okay. It's down there now. Don't take yourself too fucking seriously. So, so in 2009, we had a big crash, and I went from millions of dollars to nothing. And all that success that I had built, all that stuff I was going to prove went away. And I kept myself real small. Because the minute that happened, my head, that has always been very critical, and if you read the book, you'll learn all about my lovely head, said, see, I told you didn't deserve it. Who the fuck did you think you were? So you just go back to getting through each day, just being of service and staying sober, and this is it, and this is all you'll ever be. And I was okay with that for a while, until I reconnected with my father. I hadn't seen him in 18 years. And I got a call that it was his 80th birthday, and he wanted me to show up and go to a family reunion and meet all kinds of relatives that didn't even know I existed. My father had 19 other children from 15 women. He was a white supremacist, so he was spreading the white seed, as you do. And I called my sponsor, Deb is here, and I called her, and this is Deb. And I said, Deb, I don't know if I can go. And she goes, do you have a higher power? And Deb, you know this is you to a T. And I said, yeah. And she said, well, bring it with you. So I showed up, and I got to be me. He actually got to meet me because he didn't meet me the first time. He met this broken child, right? And this time I got to just be like, yeah, you're still a dick, but it's okay because I don't need you anymore. What I needed was to find myself, which I finally did. Thank fucking God, right? So I went back and I interviewed him, and I got all these stories, and he was fascinating as fuck. Crazy, but fascinating. And I came home, and he died. And I got to show up and be of service to my half-brothers and sisters and his widow of 50 years, and who's amazing. And I got to look at this box with his ashes, and I got to thank him for being exactly the father that I needed, which was absent. And I learned so many things from him. But I realized at that point that it was time for me to get my voice back. And I wanted to write my story, that it seemed like it was full circle, like it was time. And my head said, no, you don't get to do that. You stepped out of the ring 18 years ago. If you haven't perfected it by the age of 25, you might as well give the fuck up. Who are you to throw your hat in the ring with Lydia Yuknevich and all of these amazing people that I've just revered my whole life? So I wrote one chapter, and my writing group is in here, and I know you guys are out there, and I love you so much. And I took all of these broken bits, and I shared it with them, knowing that they were going to go, oh my God, sweetie, don't talk about that. Just don't write that and go away. And I figured then I could just put it away. And they didn't. And they gave me enough inspiration to keep going. So I kept writing one chapter and working through these awful memories and reliving this stuff that I thought I had healed. And I figured it would just take a couple months and no big deal. And 4 years later, it's like I am blood and bone. And I have just given birth to this thing, which is out in the lobby if you're interested. And and I did not give up. And I never thought in a million years that I would be able to do that. And about a year and a half ago, I got the idea for Roar. And I ran it by a friend, and she went, oh, sweetie, Roar. Ooh, it's really offensive. I don't like that word. And there's so many storytelling companies, and why would anyone come to yours? And I went, oh, you're right. And I'm just going to put that away. And then, a couple things happened a year ago, November, just a couple things. And I went home to D.C., where I'm from, and I went to the Women's March, and I wore a pink hat, and I saw lots of signs. And I saw in the slideshow, there's this quote up there. But I saw a quote from June Jordan, and it said that we are the ones we've been waiting for. And it's not, I can't wait for someone else to come do this. I can't wait for someone else to come and make it better. I can't wait for someone else to come and put the Band-Aids on and write the book and tell the stories and do the show. And so I reached out to a friend of mine, Eleanor Bonney, who's a local writer who's incredible. And I thought, okay, if she says no, I won't do it. And I messaged her, and 1 minute later she responded and she said she was in. And she was in our debut show, Mother, along with Carol and Leanne and a bunch of amazing women. And now we have Roar, and now I finished this book. And if there's any part of you that is going through something and you swear that you cannot get through it, that you cannot breathe and you have to give up, I want my entire life to be about this fucking moment where I'm telling you that you can do it. And don't give up, because life is precious and it's worth it. Grab life by the balls. Don't ever let it go. Thank you.